Hi everybody, my name is Dennis and welcome back to another album review. Today we are reviewing the latest record from Tash Sultana entitled Terra Firma. Now, if you remember a long time ago, back when I was first really starting up my channel, I gave a glowing review to Tash Sultana's previous record entitled Flow State. And I still think that their record there is just phenomenal. I love the diversity in the instrumentation. I love the lyrical themes and the narrative that is presented throughout. I love the varying soundscapes, the drawn out instrumental portions that have some beautiful progressions throughout. And the vocal performances on Tash Sultana's part are just astounding almost the entire way through. Now, a few of the singles that I had heard from Sultana had left me a little bit uneasy. Kind of going into this, it lacked the magic, really. It didn't have the same flair, it didn't have the same beauty to it, it didn't have that same kind of grand feeling that I got listening to their previous album. So going into this, I was a little bit apprehensive because I kind of already knew off the bat, just based off the singles, that it wasn't gonna be flow state. And I kind of had to accept that. And it definitely took this album a little while to grow on me, and there's still parts of it that I just don't care for as much. But I definitely think that if you can get past it not being their last album, that it's something that's pretty enjoyable. I will say the album does start off fairly weak though, even if the opening track Musk is a phenomenal opener. Easily one of the best songs on here. I love the progression of sounds on here. It's so smooth, it has that same signature style that Tash Sultana had presented on their previous album. It has that psychedelic, larger than life feel to it with these various different portions to it. It's never boring, and despite its relatively long runtime, as many of their tracks tend to be, it's so engaging. And that's the one thing I really love about Tash Sultana. Their music is always engaging and almost never boring. Especially on Flow State, I never get bored listening to that album. And Musk is kind of what I loved about that last record. There's nothing in terms of lyrics on here, so we don't get any sort of vocal performance, but the music speaks magnitudes for itself. I love the synths that come into this. The guitar lick is gorgeous to say the least, and there's just so much going on in here, and these gorgeous transitions towards the end of the track that really just bring it all together. However, after this, we do get a string of tracks that I think are relatively weak. Crop Circles is a fine track for what it is, but I do think the vocal performance on here could have used a bit of work, and the symbol of crop circles really is lost on me on this track, where it seems like Sultana is reflecting on life and death and being afraid of death, and then after, dying, is kind of just afraid of what's going to happen now. Which is an interesting concept on paper, but it's never really expanded upon in an interesting way. And again, that symbol of crop circles in the carpet just never really made sense to me. Maybe it's just something that I'm missing, but it just went over my head, whatever it was. I thought Greed and Beyond the Pine were both just okay. Lyrically, they don't do anything that's all that interesting, and I definitely think they were relatively weak vocal performances, even if they did have decent instrumental moments on them. Pretty Lady is definitely my least favorite on here. I think that the kind of washed out sounding acoustics are boring and drab. I think it's easily one of the weakest vocal performances across this entire record. And it just ends up being really, really bland, which is something that I don't say about Tash Sultana often, but Pretty Lady is just such a bland track. Although the final minute of it is quite gorgeous. It's very elegant, it's this really beautiful instrumental piece, but the rest of the track just drags on and feels so skeletal and lifeless. It feels very un-Tash Sultana. There's not that flair. Like, where is the multi-instrumentalist that we saw on the previous record? Where are the harps? Where are the 12-string guitars? Where are all of these different styles and concepts that still somehow meld so well together. Now, granted, this album still has that same psychedelic feel and that same atmosphere, and it definitely sounds like Tash Sultana. I don't think they've kind of phoned in their style at all, but it just lacks that same energy to it, if I'm being completely honest. After this, we do get a couple of decent tracks. I think Dream My Life Away is quite a nice one. I love the guitar on here, and I think the feature here from Josh Cashman is very nice. I love their harmonies on here, and lyrically, it's one of the strongest tracks here. Where basically Tash Sultana is reflecting on the just kind of dreaming their life away in the sense of, just sleeping, having a loved one watch you as, you're not really living in your life, but just really enjoying it when you're not in it. You're dreaming your life away, whether that be literally while sleeping or figuratively while dreaming of future things to come and future potential successes. It's a very interesting and nuanced track despite the relatively repetitive lyrics, but I think it works really well. And again, Josh Cashman sounds phenomenal over this instrumental, and I love what he brings to the track. Maybe You've Changed is another beautiful one. It's very soft. It's very different, a very different style for Sultana. It's very smooth. It's very beautiful. I love the vocals on here, especially the explosiveness of the chorus. It's very engaging, and it's a very reflective track that has a lot of interesting lyrical moments on here, where Tash Sultana is reflecting on kind of just their own changes in their life. Just looking at, well, maybe this has changed me, maybe that has changed me, but then, and I blamed myself. I blamed myself for all these things that I started doing differently and started doing worse, but the blame was actually on you. Where Tash Sultana, they had this negative influence in their life that ended up hurting them a lot. And finally being able to accept that and admit it and potentially move forward from this pain. It's a very interesting track that the verses add a lot to this narrative that I think is definitely worth checking out for those who haven't listened to it. Moving from there, Coma I thought was just okay. It's relatively scarce lyrically, which is perfectly fine. Some of my favorite tracks from Sultana's previous record had very little in terms of lyrics. But what's different here is the instrumentals aren't nearly as engaging. They don't have the same progression to them, nor do they have quite the catchy tunes that something like Blackbird did on Flow State. Where both that's really the most similar track I can think to, where both of them are relatively long pieces with these very kind of samey sounding instrumentals with occasional lyrics thrown in there. But the difference is that Blackbird had beautiful progressions, a unique sound overall, and enough different melodies going on to where it, remained interesting over its admittedly very long runtime. And even though Coma is about half the length of it, it's still a relatively long song, and it just doesn't really feel like it earns its length. The tunes here aren't quite as strong, the melodies aren't nearly as memorable, and the lyrics don't carry the same weight. It's an okay track for what it is, but it's definitely one of the more forgettable moments on the record. Blame It on Society has a great chorus. I love the vocals on here, and the outro instrumentals are incredibly groovy, almost like a Tame Impala type sound. I do think the verses could have used a bit more work, though. They aren't nearly as catchy. I don't care for the melodies as much, and I don't think Tash Sultana quite sells the show vocally. It's a solid track, it just didn't really blow me away. And the lyrics were kind of just a standard kind of thing of, fame isn't all it's cut out to be kind of shtick. It's nothing we haven't heard before. But really, I think after this point is when the album really starts to hit hard. The next leg of tracks are all very, very strong. Sweet and Dandy being an amazing track. Probably one of my favorite lyrically on here, where Tash Sultana really starts to address their non-binary identity, which is something that was completely absent on their previous record, which is why I believe in the original review I used the she-her pronouns, and just not knowing that Tash Sultana preferred they-them. So, kind of seeing that whole thing presented, and there's some really clever lyrical moments on here, kind of with some double entendres about X's and Y's on here. And I also really love the chorus on here, where it's very distinct from the rest of the track, yet still has a lot of power to it. It's punchy, it's fun. There's a lot going on here. It's very dense instrumentally. There's guitars, there's these kind of snappy percussions going on, there's this really fun synth work that's being played throughout. It's really, really great. And the whole thing is just kind of this love. It's all about love, really, where it doesn't matter. Where Tash Sultana is basically saying, I don't care about where what you identify as, or what you think about yourself, sexually, or your gender. I love you for you, because I stare in your eyes and I see something amazing. And I think that's such a beautiful message. Even if I don't personally relate to that, I think the sentiment of it and the way it's expressed is very, very endearing, and it's a very, very sweet track. I definitely loved this one quite a bit. Willow Tree and Vanilla Honey are both really great songs as well, with Willow Tree's really sexy, jazzy, fun instrumental being extremely captivating, and the unique vocals from Jerome Farah really sell the show towards the end of the track. I again love the way that these two harmonize with each other, much like the feature previously on here. But the bass line on here is hard hitting. I believe their trumpets are sexy and smooth. It all just melds so well together, and I just cannot get enough of this one track. And Vanilla Honey being a very sultry, soft, and beautiful song. There's just nothing I don't love about this one. I will admit it took a little bit to grow on me, and I'm not 100% sure why. I guess it just didn't quite strike me till maybe about the third or fourth time I had heard it, but once it did, I fell in love with the song. I love the tones of it, I love the vocals on here, easily one of the strongest vocal performances across the entire record, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful song. I will say the closing two tracks on here are both decent, but didn't really blow me away. Let the Light In is fine. It's a very, very soft song, and if those kinds of emotional moments really captivate you, I could definitely see why someone would love this track, but it just didn't really compel me quite as much. It's fine for what it is, but there's not enough going on lyrically nor interesting stylistic changes on this kind of trope to really engage me. I Am Free is a solid closing track on here. It feels relatively unearned, though, where the whole thing is kind of just this reflective piece on, I used to be kind of this, chained to the money and the power and the fame and looking for all this, but now I realize that doesn't matter and I'm free. And that would have been, I think this would have been a great song had those themes been developed more consistently throughout the record. But to me, there was just so much on here about romance and relationships and love that these themes never really seemed all that present on here. Like, they were occasionally on a couple of tracks, but they definitely weren't prevalent or expanded upon enough to really warrant this massive revelation of a song. So it just feels a little awkward to me. It's a fine closer. I like the instrumental, I like the tone of it. The vocal performance is quite nice as well, but it just doesn't really sell me on the concept of it. But I mean, overall, with that being said, this was a pretty good record. It's not Flow State, and I still need to just get over that it's not Flow State, because Flow State still just continues to blow me away with how incredibly diverse and unique and multifaceted everything on that record was. And a part of me feels like no matter what this was, I was going to be disappointed just because it wasn't Flow State. But at the end of the day, Tash Sultana is still an incredibly talented artist with a lot going for them. The songwriting chops are here, the vocal performances are pretty consistent, and instrumentally is just very unique. I think Tash Sultana has already kind of carved out a unique style that is very, very distinct, which I think is great, because it's easy to get caught up in the Tame Impala knockoffs when you delve into this psychedelic alt-pop that is done here. But Tash Sultana does a great job just of avoiding those cliches and those comparisons for the most part, and making their own sound, which I think is great. So even though I didn't love everything on this record, it's still a solid project with some strong highlights on here, and Tash Sultana is going to continue to be an artist I'm keeping on the lookout for. I'm feeling a decent 6 on this one. If you gave it a listen, be sure to tell me what you thought of it down in the comments below. Tell me how wrong my opinion is, as always, and I'll see you in the next review.